to thank the Commission for allowing the space and the agenda to have this conversation about addressing the Latinx community and our unique and very diverse challenges and barriers to end HIV. I want to thank our panelists for joining us and having a deep discussion, which we will not find all the answers or solutions to our problems, but at least we can create the dialogue and continue to have that dialogue. I want to take the time to welcome our panelists. We have Thelma Garcia from East Los Angeles Women's Center. We have Carlos Moreno, Commissioner. We have Joanna Padilla, Linkage and Retention Coordinator from Health Services, the Trans Wellness Center, LGBT Center. And we also have Jose Vargas, a client from APLA's HIV Elders Hive Program. So I want to thank all of them for being here. Y José, quiero decirte gracias por estar aquí. Tu voz y tu opinión es muy importante en esta conversación. So muchas gracias. This panel does have a purpose. We want to be able to provide a background on the National Latino AIDS Awareness Day and the objectives of this panel. We want to challenge the audience to understand and appreciate the diversity of the Latinx community and how HIV and AIDS impacts our community. We want to support Latinx leaders. We want to give voice to those who have felt voiceless. And we want to definitely challenge the spaces to continue to have these conversations and share our perspectives, our experiences, and our narratives. We acknowledge that this panel is intended to be a dialogue, a conversation with the commissioners and members of the public. We want to highlight the importance of addressing HIV stigma and how culture and religious factors and cultural expectations fuels that stigma. We need to be brave and talk about the unequal access and quality of care Latinx people face, continue to challenge the linguistic challenges, and we have to be brave and not be able to leave out the immigration hurdles our folks face. And we must be raw and brave and talk about the implicit and explicit biases faced by our brown communities. We want to urge the audience to act with urgency, to talk about HIV with their families and their communities. We definitely need help to dismantle the misconceptions about HIV and create a community that truly embraces the Latinx experience. This panel has 4 objectives. By the end of the panel discussion, we want to create a sense of urgency for audience members to speak to their communities and families and not just talk about HIV, but join the fight to end HIV in the Latinx community. We want to create a deeper understanding and appreciation of the diversity of the Latinx community. Generational, age, acculturation, sexual identities, Afro-Latinos, recent immigrants. We want the audience to be able to learn and be able to explain at least 2 unique challenges that the Latinx community faces when dealing with HIV. I think it is time to say that providing services in Spanish is just not enough. I've been a therapist at Bienestar for 10 years, and I have to say that in those sessions with clients, I've heard many clients share that we didn't cross the border, that the border crossed us, and that we've been here for generations, yet we are viewed as a minority, and we are viewed as immigrants or illegal aliens. And by the end of this discussion, we hope that we identify specific strategies on how the Commission and DHSP can support Latinx communities to truly face and challenge those challenges and align ourselves with the national agenda to end HIV in the Latinx community. So with that said, we can dive into the dialogue and conversation. I have 4 questions to pose to our panelists, and feel free to answer in any order. So, the first question is, what are the unique barriers that Latinx people face in the community, either just living or surviving to access social, health, and educational services?
I guess everyone else is shy, so I'll start the conversation. Good morning, everyone. My name is Johanna Padilla from the Trans Wellness Center. I know that it's really early, and I'm just waking up as well as many of you are. But I believe a lot of the issues that when it comes to care and accessing treatment, specifically for Latinx populations, not just trans, but anyone that's under the umbrella of Latinx, is really the knowledge. It's also the barrier that those of our community members who are undocumented, don't have health insurance, don't have any proof of identification, are not able to access all the services because they're missing certain documents, and are also afraid that if they access some kind of service, they may then get reported. The fact that also that the whole topic of HIV is still stigmatized in the Latinx community, because if someone has it, it's always referred to as cancer. Oh, your tia has cancer. But then the reality is that we're dealing with HIV, and because there's not that much language, and there's all this machismo, and there's all these barriers occurring in our communities, it's really difficult to really engage our populations without the proper messaging or education in that, if that makes any sense.
I'm going to talk from the point of view. I'm going to talk from the point of view of the Latino women in the East LA area, because that's where I have been doing all my work for over 25 years. So I have worked with many women who their barriers is not only the language, but also the cultural beliefs and biases, the shame of being Latinos, the spiritual beliefs that other people put on them, women who live in violence and is not recognized. And the other part of the Latino community that we don't address is the indigenous Latinas. So if I don't use the word Latinx, it's because it does not include indigenous women in it. So bear with me. You know, it's something difficult, but if I say Latinx or I just say Latinas, that's the same population, not excluding anyone. In our organization, also, we serve anybody that knocks on our door, regardless who they are, because we serve women in communities that deal with a lot of trauma and a lot of violence. So that's the population, and that's the uniqueness that our Latino women face, is cultural, spiritual, biases, stigma, violence, and I can go on.
Delma, I have just a follow-up question for you. You said you've been working in East LA for 25 years. What has been the changes or improvements that you've seen over the last 2 decades in women's work in the East LA area?
I haven't. I've been working there for 25 years. We still have the same program, and I do want to give the credit to the people who have supported the East LA Women's Center, like the City of AIDS Coordinator's Office, who has always given us funding to deal with specific challenges of women, like women who survive doing sex work, who have been trafficked. Also to be credit to the county DHSP, because they also have been supporting us and funding us, like many other programs in the community, who are the smallest one, but they continue to support and provide us guidance to be able to continue doing the work for the women. But it's still, those are the only systems that help us with HIV. So yeah, there's been a lot of advances with the women, at least for our program. We started with the promotora work, which a lot of people understand what that is, women who are in the community and they get trained and they go back into their community and train other women. This is my second time in the 25 years that I've been here that I addressed the commission. I've been here almost every single month. And the last time I presented was in the promotora concept, and I explained it so people don't have to go and research. I said it's like the Tupperware model. So if anybody knows about the Tupperware model, that's promotora work. And it did work for many, many, many years. But now it has to change. We have to address the trauma that women face in order to address the issue of HIV. Because if your mind is not healthy and your heart is not healthy, you're not gonna make good decisions. And so now we're addressing the women who come to our offices. We do it individually. We first ask them, how are you feeling today? Not if you're gonna get tested today.
Gracias, Telma. Carlos, I'll repeat the question for you. What are the unique barriers and challenges that Latinx people face in our community when accessing social, health, or educational services?
Good morning, everyone. I can really only speak from my own personal experience. Speaking for an entire Latinx community just gives me a lot of nerves. But as a young person who was diagnosed with HIV at age 19 in a different state, I would say that the barriers for me did come from a lot of the things that were already mentioned, like machismo or cultural shame and stigma of around even accessing services, preventative services, or even just talking about sex. I never talked about sex at all or my sexual identity at all with my family. There wasn't really ever any space or time that was appropriate for that kind of stuff. And after the fact of being diagnosed, just having the shame of hiding that from my entire family, which I know that so many other folks do who are living with HIV, just hide away in almost like solitary confinement with their secret, and they just feel so shamed and stigmatized from everyone because growing up, I don't know if this is anyone else's experience, but growing up, my tios would always call me joto and maricon and rough me up and hit me and called me sissy and all that stuff, which made me be more of the reclusive person that I grew into be after being diagnosed. I was like, I can't tell anyone. I mean, my family already thinks this and this and this about me. And so having to go so many years and not being able to take advantage of the care that they would eventually give me after I did finally disclose. But all those years of not being able to take advantage of that concern and that comfort and the love, the unconditional love that I didn't know was there because I never said anything because of the shame and stigma. So I think that a lot of reviewing these questions before the panel today, the only main subject that I can keep going back to is family, because that's where it all started for me. And yeah, so it's all about family.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your experience. José, ¿quieres compartir? ¿Quieres contestar la pregunta?
Buenos días, mi nombre es José Avelino Vázquez y lo que yo estoy ahorita en mi experiencia es con barreras de que la medicina es muy confortable, es muy apropiada en este momento, pero en aquellos tiempos era devastadora.
Yes, my name is Jose Avelino Vázquez, and yes, the medication, the medicine right now is better, but at the time it was devastating.
Y ahorita mi barrera es que ya me encuentro saludable, pero ahorita tengo ya una edad más avanzada, ya no tengo los 40. Ahorita es difícil agarrar trabajos por la edad y la experiencia, que ahora requieren experiencia y tanto tiempo estar incapacitado y eso. Y entonces no sé, ahora la tecnología, todo ha cambiado, viene todo nuevo. Es estar ¿cómo se dice?
Yes, one of the barriers that I have is that things have changed a lot. I'm no longer a 40-year-old man. You know, getting a job is very difficult. Now the technology has changed.
Tengo 52 años y para agarrar un trabajo pues piden experiencia. No se puede ahorita, eso es mi barrera que estoy enfrentando. Y muchos de mi generación, sobrevivientes del VIH y SIDA, es lo que estamos enfrentando. O sea, cómo lidiar con esto ahora.
I am a 52-year-old now, And getting a work is very difficult. I don't have the experience, and having been through this process has limited me in terms of my experience as a worker. Some of the survivors of the VHA and
HIV.
HIV, I'm sorry, HIV and AIDS.
Gracias, Jose. I think that Jose is touching on, the long-term survivors and the challenges and unique barriers they face. And as a Latino man in his 50s, he's just acknowledging that he's no longer young and he no longer has that technology savvy to move with the times and find employment. So gracias, Jose, por compartir. I want to move on to my next question, and that is, what do you think, or what do you want the audience or service providers or this commission at large to understand and appreciate about the Latinx community? What do they need to know that they can't just Google? I know you all just want to Google brown folks, but
Oh, let's don't Google it. Well, we cannot forget the elderly, but also the young population. They both are challenged with different obstacles. I'm gonna leave it. I need to come back to that.
it's okay. Carlos?
What you can't really Google, I guess, about the Latinx population, or speaking from my experience, is that we're an incredibly resilient group of people. I always think about, when I think about my experience, I think about my grandparents, who were the ones who brought my family to the United States, and how much they had to go through, and how I keep thinking that nothing down the line of our family, I don't think anyone in our family is going to come close to anything that they did for us, and it just makes me really emotional, and I try to be at some level up to par with something so incredible that they did, and to bring that upon myself and use that as motivation to just be the kind of speaker and the person that I am today. So we're incredibly resilient, and once we do get past all of the stigma, we're incredibly accepting and loving and embracing, and we are here for revolutions.
I'll go next. These are some good questions. I have to process my mind because I'm still waking up. But I think for me, what I would want people to understand and also appreciate about the community, specifically in the trans experiences, to keep an open mind and also to be more understanding when it comes to gender and gender expression, because wherever I go, I know that I will always be read as female or questionable if someone doesn't think I'm a woman. But I know that folks in my community who are non-binary, who are gender fluid, who just started their transition, are not at the stage that I am right now. Because for me, it's taken years to get to a point in my transition where I can blend, so to speak, without being read so much as trans or so much as a man in a dress. But people don't understand the struggle that it's taken me to get here. And as Carlos said, we're our population as a whole, as Latinos, we're very resilient because our ancestors who were here before us, those our parents, our grandparents who crossed the borders to have a better life, did it without knowing so much knowledge, but they've managed to do what they needed to do, and so we're here today, right? And so tying that into the trans community, we're also a very resilient community, but we can't continue to advance in life and succeed and be healthy and be just people if our providers are not up with the language, are not willing to be compassionate with someone's expression and idea and identity, because though you may not understand when someone says I'm non-binary or I'm a trans woman, but they're not presenting yet, it's not our job to judge. It's our job to be a tool and help them navigate through their current journey, We can't save people. We're not EMTs or doctors, but we are tools and navigators to help an individual go from point A to point Z and whatever happens in between. And so just to be very open and compassionate and empathetic to people's own journey as you help them navigate through those stages.
Thank you. And for Thelma, I said to Google, right? And what is the message from Indigenous women? What is the message from women in the East LA region that really represent a lot of places all over the world, right? What is that message, and what is that we have to learn about Indigenous women and women in general facing HIV?
First of all, that Indigenous women, it's just a name that covers a lot of populations within the Indigenous women. Just in Guatemala, where I come from, there's 25 different languages for the Indigenous women. So just right there, you find a really big barrier. And that just multiplies around the world from different Indigenous, and not just Latino women, but women in general that face the challenges of the biases in our community that they assume that women are so strong, they're gonna take on everything and everybody, and they also need the support. The Latino community, the Latinx community, is very complex. So none of us can really define what Latinos are in any stage, in any level, in any conversation. Because if I start talking about my own personal process, I came to the United States, but I also have children who are born here, who have their own children already, and they are dealing still with the biases, with the culture, with the stigma, with everything else that Latinos deal with. So the Latinx community, I know it's hard for me. And the reason it's not hard because I don't feel it is because when you work in a different area, like I do with domestic violence and sexual assault, human trafficking, exploitation, they don't use that as fluidness here. And so, I'm trying to be as fair and inclusive as possible for me. But I do respect everyone, their beliefs. Our agency believes in trauma-informed services. And that's one of the messages I want to send before our time runs out, is that one thing that we need to take is that we need to address the trauma that every human being suffers, no matter what it is. Even being diagnosed with any disease, including HIV, it's a trauma. And it causes something in your mind and in your brain. And I have some papers in the back that tells you what kind of damage trauma has in our bodies and in our brains. So if we deal with that and address that, then we can start working on how to end HIV. Before that, we cannot do it.
Thelma, I really wanted you to know that before you leave here is that this space up here is for Latinos, undocumented, Indigenous, Latinx, it's for all of us. I think you are correct that our community is so complex and it's so diverse and it's so different, but we want to make sure that you stop apologizing and you want to call us Latino, Indigenous, and that is your right, and you are safe to say and express yourself how you wish.
Thank you.
I want to finish the second question con Jose. So, te puedo repetir la pregunta. I'm going to repeat the question for you. What do you want the audience to know about and appreciate and understand about the Latino Latinx community?
Pues aquí mi compañera ha dicho mucho de lo que ya tenía escrito, de los gente indígena y todo eso. Básicamente ya habló de lo que ya tenía aquí escrito.
Well, here my partner has talked about the indigenous people and pretty much about what I have prepared for that.
All right, so then I'll move on to the next question.
Entonces vamos a ir a la siguiente pregunta.
And I'll start with Jose for the next question. And the question is, what is your individual perception of HIV knowledge and awareness in the Latinx community?
En el Latinx.
Probablemente el 70% me contestaría que sí, el 30% no, porque a uno los ha tocado en su casa, en su familia. Ese sería.
Probably about 70% would say yes, 30% no, because some people have been touched at their home and their family. That is they've been touched by this illness or.
What Jose speaks of is the Latino community isn't very interesting, right? If it's not in our homes, it doesn't exist. And that's what he's basically touching on, is that some folks are just completely naive about HIV because it's not part of their families, it's not part of their homes. Telma, contigo. What the question is, what is your individual perception of HIV knowledge and awareness in the Latinx, Latina, indigenous community?
Well, for our women, it continues to be that they perceive themselves as at no risk for HIV. That just continues to be. And I think it's just not Latinas or just women, but in general, people think they're not at risk for HIV because of the stigma, because they don't want to be faced if they go. This is an experience that we have with women in our center. Because we deal with violence, we first talk to them about how they feel, and then we ask them if they want to get tested. And when they say yes, sometimes they don't come to the appointment, and then we call them and say, why didn't you come? And it's because they say they're afraid of the answer, because they're going to have to face their families, their communities, and how they're going to be perceived as them taking the test. So that's part of, yeah.
So for women,
Lack
even
of
just taking the test is the stigma.
Yeah, it's the fears, the shame that comes with that, the sex shame that they call it, because people assume that they're women who can only be in their home and they take care of their children. Women are there are all kinds of women, women who have multiple partners, and that's okay. And so, but they perceive that, so they're afraid of being tested. And so lack of education, lack of awareness, lack of real understanding now where the disease is at, and that they can take a medication and they be okay, but they don't have that education yet. It has to be a lot of awareness, a lot of education. A lot of the Latino women do not even know what PrEP is. They really don't know. And so it's about educating. And when we do massive education in, like, let's say, a park, I've seen that done. No, you have to really make it personal. You have to really talk to that person individually to understand where they're at and to understand the education.
Gracias. Joanna?
Sure. For me, my perception of the knowledge and awareness that in the community exists for Latinx and trans people, in trans and as a whole as Latinos, I feel it's not that much, because although we have all this education and awareness in our community, right, as a whole, I'm going to have to agree with what they've both said, because the stigma is still very real. It's still really prevalent. And also the idea that if it's not in our home, it doesn't affect us, right? And I say that because it's for myself as a 20-year-old, as a young 20-year-old trans person, when I first got tested in my early 20s and I got a phone call saying I need to come in for treatment, the first thing I thought was like, oh my God, I have HIV, but I've only been with one partner, And that had to change. It ended up being gonorrhea, but whatever, little shot, and that was it. But still, it scared me enough to then think about, like I was in my head that HIV does not affect me because I'm not a typical trans girl. I'm not doing sex work. I'm not having multiple partners. That world is not my world. But all it takes is one partner. Many people in the Latino community who are happily married don't know that their husband is out there having multiple sex partners with trans women, men, other women. the HIV then gets spread, right? So because they don't think they're part of the population, and typically in Latino television, the message is always about HIV, the folks who are LGBTQ, not the folks who are cis and straight, because they still think that their population of heteronormative and machismo mentality will not be impacted by HIV. But it still does because their partners are out there doing whatever they need to do. Nothing wrong with that, but like you said, women are afraid of getting tested because in their head, I only have my husband, I'm not sleeping around. But does she know if her husband is sleeping around with other people? She doesn't know that. Or the husband, vice versa. Like, we don't know those things, but I think because of that stigma and that lack of not feeling that's the world, there's not that much education, even though we have a lot of, education there ready for people.
Beautiful answer. Thank you. Finish with Carlos.
My perception of the knowledge of the Latinx community about HIV, again, I can only speak from my own experience, but is incredibly low, is almost non-existent. Before I was in my situation, my family never even spoke about HIV or anything like that at all. And like so many of them have said up here already, that if it's not in the house, then it doesn't exist. But I brought it to the house, and I was able to be that person who shook that sort of, who just brought that conversation to the table with my entire family and forced them to rethink everything that they've ever thought about what HIV looks like, who gets it, who's invincible from it, all of those things. To be that placeholder in my family where I remember when I did come out to my family, my mom had to sort of take my tata aside and explain everything again, in Spanish and in a little bit more understandable terms so that they were able to understand everything that I was going through. And then still have to explain, this is something that we still need to provide unconditional love and support for. So going from the older generation of my tata all the way down to one of my youngest cousins texting me a few days later and just asking everything about what it means to be living with HIV. And that's just from my lived experience, and then going on as being a provider, a health educator, as an HIV tester, and doing a lot of that work within the Latinx community. There is a lot of fear, and there is a lot of want for knowledge. There just needs to be the space provided for folks to be able to explore that urge for the hunger of that sort of knowledge so that they can protect themselves, their families, and also so that they know how to deal with those situations when they do arise in their families. When it does come to your home, what do you do, and how can you treat each other, and how can you continue to be models for other families who aren't accepting of the people in their families that are living with HIV or whatever the issue is. So I know that everyone is out there and just wanting the knowledge. They just don't really know or understand where to access it.
Before I open it up for the audience and the commission, we have one last question, and I don't know if you noticed, but I'm like sweating up here because I'm nervous as hell, right? I'm in a room full of leaders and advocates who have fought this fight for the past 30 years, and I applaud you all for the work that you've done to fight this epidemic. But I think we have a problem in the Latino, Latinx community. So my last question to our panelists is, and I want you to think about this, right? I want you to really think about and give me your rawness, realness, unapologetic, and politically correct answer is, what would it take to end HIV from a Latinx-centered perspective? What is it going to take to defeat this in our community? Oh, now you all want to talk at the same time?
Sure. I don't know what it would take to end HIV from a Latinx perspective. All I do know is what it would take for us to, at the very least, eliminate stigma between ourselves. We always, we have these big events where we throw just HIV education and knowledge out at folks. But I mean, what if we had, like I was talking about myself earlier as the placeholder of HIV in the family, why shouldn't I be able to have like an HIV 101 at the carne asada and bring it that way and bring HIV education into the conversation that way. It's also about just a couple of months ago being able to bring my mom and Nana here from a different state to attend the Commission on HIV meeting, to have your families continue to engage and support the people in their lives that are living with HIV. I think that will create a domino ripple effect of just continuing the conversation, and like I said before, modeling that support for other families who aren't as accepting. It's all about the family, and that's where it starts. And it doesn't have. And I'm not speaking from the privilege that I have that allows my family, allows me to be accepted by my family. But family can be your chosen family as well. So. I think it just all starts with the conversation and to keep it going and to continue going. If y'all don't follow Joanna on Instagram, to see myself being so open with my family, Joanna being so incredibly open with her family, and just modeling what it looks like for families to be accepting of their family members is, I think, where it all starts and maybe ends.
I think we're going to see Carlos and his crew at all the taco trucks doing HIV 101s. So all the funding, GHSP, is going to go to taco trucks and Carlos Education 101. That's right. All right, Joanna. Educate us.
Always. So what I would say, I don't think HIV can end until there's a cure, period. But I believe that, like Carlos said, how we can move forward in changing the impact of HIV in Latino community and Latinx communities is really breaking the silence and breaking the cycle, meaning that we need to change the narratives that we have been told from years and years. We need to share our stories. We need to stop stigmatizing mental health, stigmatizing sexual health. We need to bring more awareness that just because you're Latinos, and if you're sick, go to the doctor. If you're dealing with depression, go to your therapist. If you're having multiple partners, it should be okay to go to talk to your parents and be like, Mom, Dad, I'm gay, oh, I'm trans, or I have 2 boyfriends. Like, what should I do? It should be okay that as future parents, as current parents, as grandparents, that as we move forward in our generations, that we break that cycle of stigma. Because if we do not break that cycle of stigma and machismo and toxic masculinity in any culture, not just Latinos, but in any culture, we're not going to grow further. We're going to stay in the same cycle of trauma, after encounter after encounter, HIV after HIV, because we're not willing to break that cycle. And until we do, we cannot fully move forward and exist.
Thank you. Delma?
I think that all of that, plus having a really open communication, a dialogue, a plática with your familia, with your friends, with your neighbor, with your coworker. Constantly, we need to be training other people around us. And in our organization, comes from different sources. We constantly need to be educating, and not educating on what now we have one pill for HIV, educating on how it's transmitted. So we have to have that dialogue, that open communication. But most of all, we need to promote collaborative efforts to strive to build a stronger and trusting relationships within this room. We need to build and share strategies, bring expertise to take steps and support organizations they're committed to and able to deal with trauma and help with healing.
José, vamos a terminar contigo.
Bueno, para mí sería compartir nuestras propias experiencias, como dice aquí el compañero, llevarlo a las mesas, en reuniones, donde se pueda, y no dejarlo nomás aquí en esta sala. Lo que aprendemos aquí entre todos, dar conocimiento a la demás gente, compartir.
Yes, for me it would be to share this information, not only have this information within these walls, but share this information outside.
Y otra de las cosas sería a la gente para motivarla a que se haga el test, la prueba, darles un incentivo para que todo el mundo sepa su diagnóstico, cómo están. Porque a veces se excusan, pues no sé. Pues,
Another thing would be to incentivize people so that they have the test done, because sometimes they prefer to say, I don't know.
I think I have 10 minutes for the Q&A for the commission and the audience. Someone keeping track of the time. So we will want to open it up for about 10 minutes for Q&A, questions, comments from the audience to the panelists, or to raise any question or concern you may have on this topic and dialogue that we're having today.
Okay, so we'll start with Commissioner. So Tracy.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I want to say, first off, I want to commend the panel on making sure that we had a conversation that was not monolithic, that we looked at people in a very different way. I also want to appreciate the cultural lessons in what we've heard today, and making sure that we are careful with our language, and we're learning all the time and open to that. So I do want to express my gratitude for that as well. I want to know, from your estimation, I hear what you feel we need and what you think we could do, but I'm also want to know if there's something that we haven't considered, something that you know that the communities that you serve deserve, that has a tremendous impact on their life and health, that we can support that we can support. And before you answer that question, I do want to say I want to appreciate the fact that I have been around for 20 years, and I thank you, Thelma, for sharing your voice today.
Don't all answer at once now.
I think part of that, I wanted to say so much. I have two pages that it was like 10 and 2, and now I feel like I didn't had enough time. But part of it is it's that we need to support families in family planning, sexual rights, not just for women, but and to respect human rights.
Joanna, is there anything that we haven't done or considered in the trans community that we should be considering?
That's a very good question. I would say, specifically speaking on the trans perspective, being Latina, I'm gonna have to go back to really starting the conversation early on, because I know that if my parents had the language and the knowledge of what it is to be LGBTQ, to be able to tell their child to go to therapy, like to just be more aware of of healthcare as well as mental health, right? I feel my transition at an early age would have been different, that my dad wouldn't have had so much anger towards me transitioning, and fear, because he used to fear that if I transitioned, I was going to get killed. My mom, being so religious, wanted to have an exorcism. So, because that is, thankfully that didn't happen, because maybe, who knows, maybe I would have been exercised. But, I feel because they were immigrants from Colombia and Mexico coming here and me being first generation American, because they didn't have that knowledge that I do, they weren't able to really uplift their child and help them grow. And so I developed into my womanhood not knowing any of these things until I got that test, and then I got that call saying I had to come in for treatment. So I think it's starting the conversation really early on with families, in a way that it's also just really constructive and really empowering for the youth and the adults.
If we want to move on to some other question, unless you all want to continue to respond.
Just a really quick response. I think that some kind of an approach that maybe we haven't really delved too much into is recognizing and realizing that someone's HIV status is just as much a part of someone's intersecting identity as anything else is. Such as your gender identity, your sexual orientation, your documentation status. Those are all things that influence the way that we navigate through the world. And sometimes there can be some like news headlines and things like that. Like just a couple of months ago, I remember hearing about Roxana and Joanna, who were two trans women who were not able to survive their stay in ICE custody. And all these stories came out, but no one ever mentioned the fact that they were HIV positive. And that is just as much as, you know, the intersecting identity as everything else that they were going through and not being able to receive treatment and things like that because of their situation. But it wasn't ever really mentioned. So just remembering that that is just as part of someone's identity as anything else is.
We're running out of time, and I want to address your question, and it was part of my closing comments is, I see a lot of leaders in this room. I see Jeffrey King, Miguel Wanda, so many leaders in this room that represent Black and brown communities. I don't have the answers to what we have to do, but I think it's fair to say that the data shows that what we have to do is something different. I think the data shows that what we are doing needs to be revamped, reevaluated, and discussed, because what we are facing is an epidemic of HIV in the Latinx community. So I think that what we've done over the past 30 years has been great. But in order to move forward and really to align ourselves with the national agenda and to really end HIV in the Latinx community, we have to do things different. The data doesn't say that these agencies that are here are doing something wrong. The data shows that we just have to think differently and truly work together. I know that I'm preaching to the choir here and about to wrap up. I know that we're all always after the same funding source. We're all fighting for the same money to serve this very complex community. And I think it's gonna take us to wear those agency pride logos with pride. I wear my Bienestar logo with pride. And I know so many of you do the same. And I think it's a beautiful thing that there are institutions that houses programs to serve our people. But I think it's gonna take more than agencies. And there's not one single agency in this room, including Bienestar, that can address and find all the solutions to end HIV in the Latinx community. We truly have to work together, and this commission truly has to reevaluate what is being done, because what is being done is not working, and the data shows that. I want to thank everybody for your time. I want to thank the commission for allowing us this space, the panelists for being here today and representing each component of our Latinx indigenous community, and thank you all for having this space to having a conversation about brown folks communities. Thank you so very much.